Hello and welcome to another episode from the Water's Edge, and today you catch us about 5 or 10 minutes into our first evening session of the year. It's finally got to that time where we can get a bit of time after work and there's enough hours of daylight to get out and catch probably, less arguably, the best bit of the day's fishing as it draws into the evening. Now, we're attached to our first fish, so what I'm going to do is concentrate on getting this in and then talk you through exactly what the plan is today, why we've come down to Reepham Fisheries to hopefully show you something that in the past has been very, very successful for me. So, like I said, we'll get this one in and then we'll talk you through it. Well, there we go. A great way to start the session. It's always nice to kick it off with a fish. And as I did mention just then, evenings are pretty much guaranteed to produce some of the best fishing. So a great way to start, a mega scale pattern fish there. And more importantly, the method we're fishing today is something that about 2 years ago, the team I fished for stumbled across, and we forgot about it pretty much, if I'm going to be honest with you. So I thought I'd come and revisit and talk you through exactly what we're doing for the rest of the evening. But we'll get this one slipped back and hopefully he's going to be the first of many. Well, as they say, start as you mean to go on. So hopefully that is exactly what's going to happen. And to be honest with you, it always does here at Reepham. It's pretty good to come down and get a few bites, but it's also good to show you exactly what we're doing today. So there's a little bit of a story behind why I'm fishing, how I'm fishing, and I'll tell you that first and then we'll get on to how I'm fishing it. So about 2 years ago, I fished for a team. We fished Reepham quite a bit and other lakes as well, and we used to catch really well on big cubes of red meat down the edge, feeding meat over the top, meat and pellet, but big cubes of red meat was really, really good. And we actually code-named it, this is getting really sad now, we actually code-named it BRM, which stood for big red meat, because anyone will know who team fishes, match fishes, if you're catching, you want to tell your teammates how you're getting on, but they're on other lakes, you have to get on the phone, and you don't want to say, oh, I'm catching on big cubes of red meat, because everyone knows what you're doing. So we used to be on the phone to each other going, get on the BRM, and it was quite funny that no one knew what it was to start with, but eventually it twigged, and it still works now. But we haven't fished it for a while, so I thought I'd come back down here today, see if it's still as good as it was, and if that's anything to go by, it is going to be just as good. So I'll talk you through a little bit of how I make the hook baits and how I feed it as well. So first of all, Reepham is no different. There's a 2 tin limit on Luncheon meat. I think it's a great rule. It's quite fatty. You don't want like meat not getting eaten in lakes. So I completely agree with it, and that's really regular across most of the country. So 2 tins of meat. The first one, what I do is, that's what my hook bait's getting made out of. So I cut that with a knife. Don't use a meat cutter because I want real random shapes, and also the fact that I want them to be big. So yeah, they're pretty much cubes, but they're different size cubes. And then what I'm doing is getting some red liquid and dyeing those big cubes up. So you end up with big cubes of red meat, which is the BRM we used to go on about. So that's what goes onto the hook, and it's so visual, really, really attractive. But over the top of that, I also want to be putting a bit of meat into the swim, and also I use meaty flavoured pellets. So it's all the meat theme going on here, as you can get the gist of. What I do is the second tin, I pretty much grate it through a riddle. So like you would cheese, I cut the tin in half and then literally grate the meat. So it goes a real fine sort of almost like grated meat texture. And then to that I add a few handfuls of the meaty pellet. Give that all a mix together, and that's what we're feeding. So at the start of the session, before we went on with the cameras, I put a big pot of that in down the edge, and then we're fishing the meats over top of it. So the peg that I've chosen to fish is peg 52. The reason being, it's a really good edge peg. Tend to get big fish down the edge. It's what we're hoping for today. But to my right, where hopefully I'm going to concentrate most of my fishing, is a lovely inlet which is creating oxygenated water, fresh water coming in from the other lakes. If that doesn't quite work, just to my left we've got a nice sort of pole with netting over top of it, reed bank or bank of the edge, so it's a nice place to fish next to, and not any snags to get worried about down there. So they're the two areas I'm fishing. I'm pretty eager to get back out there because there is going to be more waiting for, I'm sure. So I'll talk to you a bit more about the rigs, how we're hooking it and how we're feeding it throughout the session as we go on. But for now, I'm going to concentrate and I'll get another rig out there, and hopefully it's going to be just a few minutes before we're back with another fish. So on with the BRM, a nice visual hook bait, a little bit of the mixture into the toss pot, that minced up meat and some pellets, and we will get back out onto the spot. Like I said, just next to the inflow pipe is where we're starting, and then lower in pretty much the only visual big bit of bait there is in your peg, tapping your diced up meat right on top of it. There we go, another what I would class as typical bite fish in this method. Now I think a little bit about why this was so successful for the team when we fished it is two reasons. One, because the big red meat is so blatant and in their face, they just home in on it, so it's the hook bait that they pick out before anything. So one, that's a reason why I think you catch a lot of fish on it, and two, it's because it is such a big bait, there's no messing around with what's a bite and what's not. So if you've ever done paste fish, and this is the same, it's because the bait is so big, they really have to suck it in to get that into their mouth. So you've not got to worry about all these little liners that are happening and like that. You literally wait for the float to disappear. That's when you know to strike. So we've stopped us foul hooking a lot of fish as well, which when there's a lot of fish in a lake like there is here, that can be a real thing. Don't foul hook them, can be a big plus. So hopefully this one's now coming to the net, and we'll have another fish to show you. It's a nice looking bit of ghost carp in him. There we go. As far as commercial carp go, that is a very, very good looking fish. He's well nailed in the side of the mouth, and like I said, he's got a bit of ghost in him, this one. There's a few oranges flecked in amongst him, so certainly would probably be classed as a ghost carp, but a very, very good looking fish. He's absolutely full of life, but another firm favourite of the big red meat, and a lot of these fish are. It really has worked so well for me when I've fished this on a multitude of venues, actually, not just here, but it goes without saying, something that is accustomed to summer fishing. I certainly wouldn't be doing this in the winter. This is the method for real positive, bigger fish down the edge, is when it really comes into its own. So let's get this one slipped back and get back out there for another one. There we go, a short period of panic that he was heading into the trees, but we got him under control. And I just love this time of day and this time of year when you can start to be positive and aggressive with your feeding, aggressive with your rigs. Certainly after a few winter leagues and a few harder sessions, it's nice to come out and not have to worry about, are you feeding too much, is your line slightly too heavy, is your hook too big. Those things sort of, well, certainly fishing this, those things go out the window because it's ultra positive, ultra aggressive, and you do it like this is perfect, you know. We've said it a million times before in every video, and anyone produces, they'll say the same, that evenings are a real good time to fish. Like any method, whatever you do, most people have probably gone home by now, and what do you do when you finish? You put your bait down the edge most of the time if it's not available to keep for your next session. So fish just naturally come in this time of year. But we'll concentrate on getting this one in. He's almost ready, and we'll have another one to show you. Okay, it's an evening of the pretty ones. Another nice looking fish with a bit of orangey sort of ghost in him as well. See if I can just tease that hook out. Really well hooked, but again, it's because they're positively picking up that bait. And there we are. Here's another cracker in the afternoon session. What we'll do is we'll pop them in the net, and then we'll talk you through a little bit more about the rig, the elastic, and how we're hooking it as well. Though let's slip them in the net and we'll get on with that now. There we go, and it certainly looks like word has got about that we're catching, because I've got a few fans turned up around me now, unfortunately in the form of hens and chickens, so not quite what we were looking for. But we'll talk you through the rig and exactly what you need to gear up to fish this style. So first of all, like I said, we're fishing most of the time next to the inlet pipe and there's a tree behind it, so we need to make sure that the gear is strong enough to handle what we're fishing. So we'll start with the elastic. Now I've got a 16 to 18, but it's set quite tight actually, so it's enough for me to get away from the snag, and then we can play them in this open water nice and safe. So a fairly strong elastic is essential. And then main line is exactly the same, so 0.22 straight through, super strong. I'm never going to break that unless something really goes wrong. And then I'm fishing a size 12 bait band hair rig on the end of that. Now float wise doesn't really matter with this, as long as it's quite stable it's going to be absolutely fine. The important thing is making sure it's strong. So last thing to mention is how we're hooking the meat. Now what we've found in the practice we done when we were doing this as a team event is it was so much better to hair rig the meat, and the way I like to do it is pull it into a bait band. So I literally put a bit of meat onto my baiting needle and then I pull it into the meat. So what that does, the band then expands inside the meat and it leaves the hook point sitting proud of the meat. So you can see there it catches and nicks into my finger, and you can imagine that's the same in the water. If I was lifting up, whack, the hook's the first thing that catches me rather than having to strike through the meat. So that for us just worked a lot better than hooking it on as perhaps you normally would. But apart from that, it's relatively simple, but the main thing is it's very, very strong. So the meat's on. We'll put another little pot of the meat and pellet mix to go over the top, and we'll get back out there on the spot. So I think initially I kicked the swim off, as you said, with a big pot, but every time I'm either getting a bite, missing a bite, or getting a fish, I'm going out with another small pot of bait, and then that allows me to keep an eye on what's happening. So as long as I keep catching like that, every time I go in I'll keep putting more bait in. I'm going to be aggressive with it, and if it slows down a bit I'll then perhaps pick the big pot up and go down again. But at the minute it's been absolutely fine and we haven't needed to do that. So right in that spot we tap the bait over the top, and it's not going to be too long before we're into another one. Get on me, alright. Well, I love it when they decide to run away from the bush rather than try and get in it. It makes my job so much more easy. But it's another fish coming in, and it's really starting to fish well now. We're getting competition by keep introducing that bait all the while, and then the big red meat sits there proud on its own. The only thing to really home in on and have a mouthful, and that's the one that they pick out quite often as one of the first bits of food they go for. So we'll get this one in and we'll get you to have a look at him. There we go. Another cracking little fish. He's got a bit of grey in him, this one. He's got plenty of life in him though. I just slipped that hook out. If he was probably, well, what does it take to get a name in a carp now? Let's say 20 pounds bigger, he'd probably be called the slate grey. I know people like to name him when they get to a certain size, but a cracking fish and a really, really enjoyable evening. That's one thing that surprised me time after time. So this is probably, what am I going to say, 4.5 pound probably, and that probably 8, 10, 12 mil cubes of meat these fish are eating. So although we're trying, you know, fishing big baits like that, we're trying to catch the bigger fish, sort of 8, 10 pounds down the edge. They don't have to be, you know, absolutely massive to catch on this method. A 3-4 pound fish like this one here proves they've got a big enough mouth and a big enough appetite to pick up quite large chunks of meat. So yeah, it probably wouldn't work for real small fish, but as soon as they start getting to this sort of size, it's certainly worth looking at. But we'll get this one slipped back and we'll get back out there again. Certainly putting a nice run of fish together now. It's fished as well as it did those 2 or 3 years ago we fished it, as I can remember it. But I'll just get another bait prepared, and it is probably worth a mention that, you know, just because big root cubes of red meat work for us and it works on this particular venue, it doesn't mean that something different wouldn't work for you. You know, I choose to dye mine with red goo, 1 because it's flavoured and 2 because the colour red works really well here. But experiment with it. You know, you might find yellow works better on your venue, or green even. It really could be up to you. So it's something that certainly is worth having a little play with, and let us know if you find anything better. But you can imagine, you know, looking at this now, if you've got the pale colour of the meat and the pellets out there, and then you drop this cube of meat on top of it, it just stands out as the one thing that they're going to home in on first. And that's why, 1, it's big, 2, it's coloured, and I think it really makes a difference. But we're just going to fill this pot up, and hopefully we'll be into another fish shortly. Another thing that is worth mentioning as well, that when you grate meat, because it's quite an oily bait as when you fish it, as you break it up and it's not so heavy in one particle, it can float due to the oil content. Now, to get around that, if it does happen, if your meat's particularly oily, mix your pellets and your meat together and then just put some water with it as well. That will sort of skim the oil layer off it. The pellets will then take on the water as well, and it all just sinks nicely. So if you do find you've grated it and you've cupped it in and bits and pieces have floated off, to combat that, a bit of water in there, just lake water's fine. Leave it to sort of sit for 5 or 10 minutes and you'll find that it's an awful lot better. So we'll ship back onto the mark, but it's worth mentioning while I'm waiting for this next bite. Obviously, I said, hey, we codenamed this BRM for big red meat, and I just wondered if anyone else has ever had any secrets or code words you haven't given away to people for a while until other people have finally worked out what it was. Just have a little bit of a laugh at what suggestions and things you've come up with. I'm sure there's going to be some out there. We're not the only ones to keep things back for a team or code word something, I'm sure. So let us know in the comments below, and we'll get back and see if we like any of them in particular. But that float's settled in there nicely now. A few little liners, and it's not going to be long before we've got another one. That one, as I hit it, felt like it was going to be a decent fish. I don't know why. Sometimes you can tell when you strike that they feel a bit heavier. I don't think he's massive, but he certainly had a bit of weight with him when I struck into him. So I think I probably will call this one the last fish, actually. We've got a bit of time left, and I've got a little bit of bait left, so I might have a few more casts after the cameras are off. But basically what we wanted to do was show you something that I personally had stopped using, and I don't know why, and it's something that we need to revisit again, I'm sure. But we'll get this one in, we'll get you one last look at him, and it'll probably be a nice way to end it. There we are. He certainly is going to be a nice one to end on. We'll just untangle him. He decided to wrap himself around the line in the net. But these are the sort of size fish that you'd be expecting. It's probably getting on towards £6–7, and certainly ones in a match that fishing like this would be more than welcome to get in your net. So he's even got his fin up for us, posing for the camera, the last shot, and one that has put a really good ending to what has been, 2 or 3 hours fishing after work. Perfect time of year, perfect method for it, and it's one to get out and try yourself. So I hope you've enjoyed it. All that's left to say is, if you don't already follow us and subscribe to our YouTube channel, then please subscribe for regular videos, and hopefully you'll see us out again catching a few more different fish and on a few different messages. But for now, for us, it's time we headed off. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you again on the next one.